Welcome to Idlewild Cottage, a quiet place where kindred spirits can linger together over a cup of tea, savoring all things lovely and cozy. My name is Juliana, and I'm delighted to have you. Each episode here at the cottage will center around a theme. That theme will be celebrated in a number of ways, through literature, art, nature, and even some favorite movie scenes. We'll cherish the sweet and simple things of life. So make yourself at home, and I'll put the kettle on. The sound of my penny loafers tap, tap, tapping up the stairs. The feel of the brass handle as I pulled out the long, narrow wooden drawer and flipped through the card catalog. The smell of ink, paper, old books, and the expanse of aisles upon aisles of bookshelves holding promise, delight, and wonder before my very eyes. Yes, I absolutely loved going to the library as a child. On this cozy October day, I'd like to invite you into the library of Idlewild Cottage. Though imaginary, I can just picture the ceiling-to-floor wooden bookcases, the fire crackling merrily on the hearth, the plush chairs just the right shape and squishiness for curling up with a good book, and yes, the pot of tea to fortify our intellectual endeavors. As we pull books off the shelves together today, we'll step into several literary and cinematic library scenes. I'll first make my way toward the L section and pull down a couple of books by Hart Lovelace, for our dear friend Betsy Ray absolutely loves the library. In Betsy and Tacy Go Downtown, we delight with 12-year-old Betsy on her first trip to the library. Betsy tried to act as though it were nothing to go to the library alone, but her happiness betrayed her. Her smile could not be restrained, and it spread from her tightly pressed mouth to her round cheeks, almost to the hair ribbons tied in perky bows over her ears. Once Betsy reaches Lincoln Park, we read, "She kept briskly on until she reached the library. This small white marble temple was glittering with newness. Betsy went up the immaculate steps, pulled open the shining door. She entered the library a bit self-consciously, never having been in a library before. She approached the young lady at the counter, who had a cozy little face with black and dancing eyes and curly, black, untidy hair. 'Are you looking for the children's room?' she asked. Betsy beamed in response. 'Well, not exactly. That is, I'd like to see it. But I may not want to read just in the children's room. You see, I want to read the classics.' 'You do?' 'Yes, all of them. I hope I'm going to like them.' The young lady looked at her with a bright intensity. 'I know a few you'll like. Come on, I'll show you.' Miss Sparrow led the way and introduced Betsy to classics such as Tanglewood Tales by Nathaniel Hawthorne, Tales from Shakespeare by Charles and Mary Lamb, and Tom Sawyer, which she assured Betsy was going to become a classic. Later on, we read, Betsy seated herself in the chair nearest the fire, piled the books beside her, and opened Tanglewood Tales. But she did not start to read at once. Before she began, she smiled at the fire. She smiled at her books. She smiled broadly all around the room. As Betsy makes her way through high school, the library continues to be a special place. In Betsy in Spite of Herself, we find a familiar scene. Betsy loved the quiet, the smell of books, the fireplace. She loved Miss Sparrow, the small, winsome librarian with her curly, untidy hair and merry eyes. The warm, well-lighted rooms were almost empty now, and Miss Sparrow helped Betsy choose some books. Tonight she suggested books by women writers, Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice and Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. The mention of Jane Austen brings me to a humorous library scene in the 1995 film Sense and Sensibility. Young Margaret seeks refuge from the invasion of John and Fanny by hiding under the table in the home library. Edward and Eleanor attempt to coax her out with their deliberate geography blunders, knowing of Margaret's love for the atlas. Edward begins, "Do you by chance have such thing as a reliable atlas?" "I believe so." "Excellent. I wish to check the position of the Nile. My sister tells me it is in South America." Eleanor is quick to pick up the hint. "Oh, no, she's quite wrong, for I believe it is in Belgium." They continue their absurd dialogue until Margaret can take no more. She appears from under the table and huffs, "The source of the Nile is in Abyssinia," thus sealing a lifelong friendship for all involved. The beautiful library at the Dashwood home brings to mind the library at the Lawrence home in Little Women. In Chapter 5, Laurie is down with a cold, and neighborly Joe pops on over to keep him company. Laurie led the way from room to room, letting Joe stop to examine whatever struck her fancy. And so at last they came to the library, where she clapped her hands and pranced, as she always did when especially delighted. It was lined with books, and there were pictures and statues and Sleepy Hollow chairs and tables and bronzes, and, best of all, a great open fireplace with quaint tiles all round it. "What richness!" sighed Joe, sinking into the depth of a velvet chair and gazing about her with an air of intense satisfaction. "Theodore Lawrence, you ought to be the happiest boy in the world." One especially happy boy is Sam Gribley from my side of the mountain, though his reasons for visiting the local library are not quite as ordinary. Sam hopes to locate his great-grandfather's land. Perhaps the library will have a map. The librarian was very helpful. She was sort of young, had brown hair and brown eyes, and loved books as much as I did. All I said to her was that I wanted to find the old Gribley farm, and that the Gribleys hadn't lived on it for maybe 100 years, and she was off. I can still hear her heels click when I think of her, scattering herself around those shelves, finding me old maps, histories, and files of letters and deeds. Miss Turner, that was her name, found it. She found Gribley's farm in an old book of Delaware County. Then she worked out the roads to it and drew me maps and everything. Finally, she said, "What do you want to know for? Some school project?" "Oh, no, Miss Turner. I want to go live there." "But, Sam, it is all forest and trees now. The house is probably only a foundation covered with moss." "That's just what I want. I am going to trap animals and eat nuts and bulbs and berries and make myself a house. You see, I am Sam Gribley, and I thought I would like to live on my great-grandfather's farm." Miss Turner was the only person that believed me. She smiled, sat back in her chair, and said, "Well, I declare." Another sympathetic librarian is Miss Allen in Sidney Taylor's All-of-a-Kind Family. Based on the author's childhood, this charming series follows the lives of 5 sisters putting down their proud Jewish-American roots on the Lower East Side of Manhattan in 1912. The opening chapter is titled The Library Lady. Almost no East Side child owned a book when Mama's children were little girls. That was an unheard-of luxury. It was heavenly enough to be able to borrow books from the public library, and that was where the children always went on Friday afternoons. Right after school, they rushed off happily to get fresh reading material for the weekend. Alas, on this particular Friday, Sarah is distressed. She can't find her library book after loaning it to a friend and dreads the trip and confession she knows must follow. She need not fear, however, for Miss Allen has keen eyes and a kind heart. A branch of the New York Public Library was only a few blocks from their home. Soon the familiar brown building came into view. Through the high door and up the staircase they went. With each step, Sarah grew more despairing. "They'll take my card away," she thought. "I'll never be able to take out any more books." Sarah's older sisters gently encouraged her. "Come on, Sarah," Ella said. "Let's get this over with." Gently, she pulled Sarah towards the desk, and the 5 children fell in line. Henny nudged Sarah. "Isn't that a new library lady? She's pretty," she added. Sarah studied the new library lady anxiously. She looked so fresh and clean in a crisp white shirtwaist with long sleeves ending in paper cuffs pinned tightly at the wrists. The library lady looked up, and Sarah could see the deep blue of her eyes. The library lady smiled. "She has dimples," Sarah thought. "Surely a lady with dimples could never be harsh." The smile on the lady's face deepened. In front of her desk stood 5 little girls dressed exactly alike. "My goodness, are you all one family?" "Yes, all one family. Some people call us all of a kind family." "All of a very nice kind. I'm Miss Allen, your new librarian. I'm very glad to meet you." I encourage you to read this sweet story to discover the kindred spirit Sarah finds in Miss Allen. A more formal librarian catches Jimmy Stewart off guard in the 1940 film The Philadelphia Story. Also starring Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant, this is probably my favorite film from this era. Jimmy Stewart, Macaulay Connor, visits the local library to dig up some material on the elite Lord family. While approaching the bookcase, the librarian questions, "What does thee wish?" "I'm looking for some local... what did you say?" "What does thee wish?" With puzzled awe, Connor continues, "Local biography, history." "If thee will consult with my colleague in there." She points the way, and Connor can't help but smirk as he adds, "Dost thou have a washroom?" And the librarian unflinchingly points the way to the washroom. For another fun cinematic library moment, you might enjoy the 1947 musical Good News, starring June Allison and Peter Lawford. Set on the campus of fictional Tate University in the 1920s, June Allison, as Connie, helps pay her way through school by working in the library. Peter Lawford, as Tommy, is the star football player who has his eye on Pat, the new girl in town. Well, Tommy decides to learn French to impress the girl, and who better to teach him than the intelligent Connie, who happens to be majoring in languages. Their first impromptu lesson is sung throughout the library as Connie returns stacks of books. Library romance, be it a home or public library, is budding in other classic musical favorites too, including The Music Man, Beauty and the Beast, and My Fair Lady. Thank you to each of you who helped compile a great list of literary and cinematic library scenes through my Instagram stories. And thank you all for helping support this podcast through your 5-star reviews, comments, and shares. I so appreciate you helping get the word out. As we continue to connect here and through Instagram, I'd love to hear from you. Do you have an especially cozy library memory connected with your childhood? Why don't you go ahead and share it by messaging me on Instagram? In closing today, let's look to the Proverbs. King Solomon, the author of this book, was blessed with incomparable wisdom. I can only imagine what his library looked like. His advice? Take hold of instruction. Do not let go. Guard her, for she is your life. Kindred spirits, in this topsy-turvy world of ours, Solomon's charge still holds true. Would we take hold of God's instruction, and would we live by it in love, faithfulness, and joy? Thank you for joining me today, dear ones. Please come again soon to Idlewild Cottage.